In this Elden Ring video, I'm going to be taking a look at character creation and the classes and how to decide which class you want to play in Elden Ring. We're going to run through the stats, starting equipment of these classes, and sort of make a comparison so that you can decide which one is the best for you. The first class we're going to take a look at is the Hero. This is a primarily strength-based class that has high vigor and strength, meaning that you're going to be able to do a lot of damage with strength-based weapons. If you don't know, the strength stat no longer boosts your equip weight. It is back to endurance like it was in previous games. So that is not a factor here. And I don't think this is a very beginner-friendly class because all you begin the game with is a battle axe and a shield that doesn't have 100% physical block, meaning it's good for parrying, but you're probably not going to block with it. And there are really no other tools in its arsenal. It doesn't have any magic or spells it can use. Its intelligence and faith are low, so it's not likely ever going to use these things. So if you're looking to play a pure strength build, then this is probably the class you might want to choose at the beginning. But if you're a new player, this is going to be exceptionally difficult for you, and I highly advise against it. Next up is the Bandit Class. This kind of has an all-around stat spread. It leans a little more towards the dexterity side of things and arcane side of things. Arcane directly affects some requirements for weapons and spells. And it also has an effect on your item discovery, meaning you're more likely to find certain items, or they drop from enemies rather. But it doesn't have any notable, standouts other than dexterity in terms of damage. It begins the game with a knife, a short bow, a parrying buckler, and some arrows. So it's going to have a ranged option. It's going to be good at backstabs early on. And if you're good at parrying, this might be a good class for you. But if you're a new player, again, this is not one I would recommend. It's going to be a rather steep curve right out of the gate with its tool set and ability spread, or attribute spread rather. So I don't recommend this if you're a new player, but if you're someone who's good at parrying and backstabbing, then this is probably a solid choice for you. Next up is Astrologer. This is the de facto mage class that you can pick during the beginning of the game. It has high intelligence, which is good for magic. It has high mind, which increases your FP or mana, so you can cast more spells before needing to drink a potion. And it has some decent dexterity, meaning you can use certain, dexterity-based weapons. And dexterity also increases the cast speed of spells. It begins the game with a short sword, a staff, a shield, and 2 spells, Glintstone Pebble and Glintstone Arc. Both of these are staples throughout the game, so they're really good pickups. The Astrologer is probably one of the most beginner-friendly classes because it gives you a solid ranged option, allowing you to thin out enemies before getting into range. And on some of the early game dungeon bosses particularly, it allows you to just range them down without ever having to engage in melee combat, which makes things a lot more easy. So if you're a new player, this is absolutely recommended for you right out the gate. If you're not someone who's familiar with Souls combat or From Software's combat, this is not a bad choice. Next up is the Warrior Class. They have very high dexterity, and that's about all really. Otherwise, their stats are pretty balanced around the board. They begin the game with 2 scimitars, so they can dual wield right out the gate, and they have kind of a weak shield. If you are familiar with Souls, then this is not a bad choice for you. You get very high damage from dual wielding, and because they have high dexterity, they're a natural choice for any dex build. But if you are a new player, I highly suggest not choosing this class. Not having a stable shield if you're new to the game, not having a very good ranged option is going to limit how effective you are with this playstyle. So if you're a new player, I would stay away from this one, but if you're a veteran and you know what you're doing, then this is definitely a good choice if you want to play a dex build. Next up, we have the Prisoner Class. This class has high intelligence and dexterity, and because of the equipment it has, S-Stock, Glintstone, Staff, Rift Shield, and Magic Glintblade, it's sort of setting you up to be a Spellblade or a character that not only uses magic, but uses magic in melee range or melees with magic. So if you sort of want to play like a Spellblade type character, then this might not be a bad choice for you. It's certainly a more advanced style of play and one that I wouldn't recommend to a new player. If you're looking to get into the magic scene and want to be a magic user, I highly recommend going with the Astrologer if you're new to the game. But if you're a Souls veteran, then this is probably going to be, at the top of your list for those of you who like fast weapons and magic combined. Next up, we have the Confessor Class, which leans a little bit into the faith area of things. It has a decent all-around stat spread. It's got some mind as well, so it's going to have a bit of a bigger FP pool than some other classes. But if you've ever wanted to play a sort of paladin class, or that's kind of the way you imagine yourself playing, then this is sort of the setup for that style of play. You're not only going to get a shield that gives you 100% physical resistance, a broadsword, and a finger seal, so you can, attack with a sword and cast incantations. You also get Urgent Heal, which heals you, and Assassin's Approach, which muffles your sound a bit, so you can approach enemies more stealthily. I don't think Assassin's Approach really fits in here, though the name is Confessor. But if you want to make a paladin or a class that has a good shield from the beginning of the game, you plan on doing like sword and board, maybe some medium to heavy armor, and use some healing and buffing spells and maybe some offensive spells, then this is a very good choice for that. Very, very good for new players because of that 100% physical block shield is going to allow you to block, a lot of attacks right out of the gate, which a lot of other classes cannot do. Next up, we have the Wretch Class. This class starts at level 1 and has a stat spread of 10 across the boards. This class is really good for those who want more of a challenge, but also those who want exact control over their character. Because they begin the game at level 1, they don't have pre-allocated attribute points. They're able to create their character exactly and as efficiently as they want. So if you're somebody who knows exactly what sort of build you want, what the breakpoints are, etc., I imagine this class will be a lot more popular like after a first playthrough, once people know what the soft caps and hard caps are for things and what requirements they need exactly for certain weapons and armor. Again, this is not one I recommend for a new player. Starting out with only a club is going to make things extremely difficult. Next, we have the Vagabond Class. This is sort of your go-to tank class or knight class. It has high vigor, meaning it has high health. It's got some good strength and dexterity, so it can use just about any weapon out the gate. It has a 100% physical block shield, and it has some very heavy armor, as well as a sword and a halberd. You actually begin the game fat rolling, if I'm not mistaken, with this class, meaning that your roll is very, very slow. So I do recommend, if you do choose this class, maybe unequipping a piece of armor or swapping out a piece of armor for a lighter piece to get under that 70% threshold so that you're at least mid-rolling with this build. But again, it's a very, very good setup for someone who wants to sword and board and be tanky that's not really going to use magic. As such, it's very, very new player friendly as long as you're not looking to use any sort of incantations or magic. The next class is the Prophet. This leans even more into faith than the Confessor class. It has a bit more mind, has a little bit lower in terms of the martial stats, etc. So if you want to be more of a pure incantationist or someone who's just casting incantations and uses melee only when necessary, this is a good choice for you. It begins the game with kind of a crappy shield, a spear, a finger seal, and the incantations heal and catch flames, so you're going to be able to heal yourself as well as have a short-range offensive fire-based spell right out of the gate. So again, this is probably one that I wouldn't necessarily recommend to a new player because the fact that you don't really have very high damage in that short spear. Catch flame is extremely difficult to use for a new player. This is probably for a more advanced player who knows they're going to be all in on faith and spells right out of the gate. But if you're a new player, I would highly recommend going Confessor instead of this, and then maybe playing this class after you've gotten some experience in the game if you want to go that route. Or you could even just pump faith on your Confessor and turn it into basically the same thing, maybe with just not 100% optimized stats. Lastly, we have the Samurai class. This class leans heavily into dexterity, has a decent stat spread on the martial statistics, decent vigor, decent endurance, decent strength. And it begins the game with an uchi katana and a longbow and a kind of crappy shield and some arrows. Very, very good class to begin the game with, and it's what I started my playthrough through the game with. The uchi katana is a very, very powerful weapon. Its weapon ability is very, very strong. It also sets bleeding on enemies or kind of builds up their bleed meter, dealing a ton of damage to them when it fills up. And having the longbow give you damage at range is really good. So it's got a good mix of ranged and melee combat. And the samurai armor is also quite durable. It's not the heaviest armor in the game, but it has really, really good protection. I think this class is probably more suited to an advanced player than a beginner player, only because you're not going to be blocking and learning to dodge every attack can be quite challenging. However, I do think it is somewhat beginner friendly because of the fact that you can use the bow to thin out enemies before getting into melee range. And because the uchi katana has such a strong ability and unsheath, I do think you can play this class as a new player. It might take you a little bit longer to get the hang of it than some other new player-friendly classes, but once you do, you're just going to start rolling. Moving on to the keepsakes or the gifts you get at the beginning of the game, you get to choose one. If you're new to the game, I highly recommend taking the Golden Seed. This is going to give you an extra flask, so you can use that for mana or FP, or you can use that for health, but it's going to give you one extra that you wouldn't have if you didn't choose this. Very, very strong for new players because maybe you just need one more heal in order to get through a boss while you're learning the game, or maybe you just need a little bit more mana to get that last spell off, and that extra flask goes a long way. Beyond that, there aren't too many other good choices. You can take the Lands Between Rune to gain some runes quickly in order to gain a couple of levels, which can help you get off to a stronger start. It's not going to make a huge difference, but it would help. The Crimson Amber Medallion is not a bad choice, though you can get this item relatively early on in the game anyway, so it would kind of be a duplicate. And some people might be tempted to take the Stone's Word Key in order to be able to break the Imp statue seal at the beginning, and there are other statues throughout the game that use this key, but you can get a lot of these keys. These keys are not like it's not like a one-off like it was in Dark Souls, where you got it and you had it or you didn't. There are lots of them around the game, so you're not missing out if you don't start with this, but it would allow you to go, into the underground area right away, which is quite challenging. So if you're a new player, I don't advise that, but if you're someone who really, really wants an adventure at the beginning of the game, then you may want to choose that. That's pretty much it for our character creation and classes guide. Just a reminder that you can go in any direction you want with any class. You can pick a class that has low intelligence and faith and make it into a spellcaster if you want. These are just sort of templates to get you off in the direction of a certain playstyle, but the freedom of how you want to play is completely up to you. So don't think that because you picked a class, you find yourself a quarter of the way through the game and you wished you would have picked a different class, that you can't just change the way that you play and change the attributes that you put points into. You always can restart, of course, but you're not locked into a playstyle just because you choose a class in this game. So what class are you guys going to play at launch? What are your tips for new players? Let us know in the comments below.